by Robert Spitzer. Um, gosh, I can't see this. Robert Spitzer. This book is called New Proofs for the Existence of God, Contributions of Contemporary Science and Philosophy. The first 100 pages of this book are absolutely amazing because it explains all this stuff about the Big Bang. Did the Big Bang even happen? What are some of the alternatives to the Big Bang? What about a steady state universe that is sort of bangs and collapses, bangs and collapses? Maybe that's what we have, right? All these kind of crazy questions. So the New Proofs for the Existence of God, fantastic book. Um, Another good book about what the early Christians believed, for those who care, is this book called The Fathers Know Best by Jimmy Akin. It basically goes through all of the Catholic beliefs and what the first Christians said about them. And that's basically a proof to say that we didn't just make this stuff up, right? It's always been there. People who want to know about Mormonism, great book, Inside Mormonism, What Mormons Really Believe. This guy was a Catholic priest, Isaiah Bennett. He was a Catholic priest who left the Catholic Church to become a Mormon, and then eventually shook his head and said, "What am I doing?" And he came back out. So he learned a ton while he was a Mormon, and just kind of helps understand and explain it. There's 3 books there. I honestly, I've got like 5 bookshelves of books behind me here, but maybe that helps a bit. Um, who's Cosmo Lano? I don't know who this guy is. Where else could we learn this knowledge? Great Donut God. Thank you for asking. Podcasts. Raise your hand if you're into podcasts. Fantastic. There's a couple of really good podcasts. One is Catholic Answers. Catholic Answers is a fantastic podcast. It's actually a radio show that they also podcast, and they basically it's a call-in show where people call in and just ask random questions, and then they have experts who sort of answer them. Another good one is a podcast called Call to Communion by Dr. David Anders, who also is a call-in show where people call in with random questions, and he does a fantastic job of answering them. Another good podcast is the Council of Trent. Council as in, a counselor. I'm counseling you. The Council of Trent by Trent Horn. He does a lot of great apologetics. Yeah, there's 3 podcasts. Dun, 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 dun. Well, oh, Jesus Loves You 100. Thank you very much. This is the best content. Yes, tight. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, hey, Stefan. Do you believe in the events of the Bible? I don't understand how the Bible and all other religions are any different from fairy tales. You know what's funny? C.S. Lewis. So C.S. Lewis was a philosophy. He was a professor of mythology in Britain, and he was an atheist, but J.R.R. Tolkien converted him to Christianity, and then C.S. Lewis went on to write all these great Christian books, including the Chronicles of Narnia. But he had a response to people who made that argument that the Bible is a myth; it's just fairy tales. And he was a professor of mythology, and he said that the people who make the claim that the Bible is all myth and fairy tales haven't read many myths, because it doesn't read like a myth. It's myths don't have, if you read like the Greek myths about the Greek gods, they're not really located in space and time, right? You don't read about like, in the year 312, Zeus visited the Acropolis, and when he was at the Acropolis, he talked to the governor and said, they don't do that, right? They don't locate it in time and space that way. But the Bible does, right? The Bible, all the stories are located in time and space. In such and such a city, there were these people, they did this thing at this time under this governor. So that speaks to the fact that it's more of a historical document. Now, the Bible isn't just one book, right? It's a collection of books. There's 73 books in the Bible. In the Catholic Bible, in the Protestant Bible, there's 66. But and these books, they have all different writing styles, right? Like some of it's history, the way you would think of history, but some of it's poetry, right? And some of it's like allegory, right? Some of it is writing styles that don't even exist anymore for the most part. like Revelation is written in a style called apocalyptic, which is where you basically try to paint a picture using words. So it's much closer to poetry than it is to history. So sometimes people read the Bible expecting it to be like literal, chronological history, and they get confused because that's not really what every book is supposed to be. Um, the one thing I will say about the Bible, which is kind of cool, is that a lot of the events that happen in it, we just continually keep finding like archaeological evidence for it. Like for example, Jericho, right? The city of Jericho is features in a number of Old Testament stories, and up until about 50 years ago, we didn't know where Jericho was, and so people would say, "Oh, Jericho's a." Those stories fall under the allegory heading, right? Those are the myth stories that are in the Bible, and then we found the ruins of Jericho, and we know where it is now, and so that really sort of locates all the Jericho stories in time and space, and lends more authority to the idea that it's actual history. So, you know, the other thing I like to recommend is actually reading the whole Bible, right? A lot of people who say, "Oh, the Bible is a bunch of myths and fairy tales," what they're basically doing is like basically just repeating what they've heard from other atheists, right? Or repeating what they've heard from other non-believers. Is that this relatively intelligent atheist says that the Bible is fairy tales, therefore it must be fairy tales. But guess what? That person hasn't even read the Bible. A really cool podcast for people who are interested is called The Bible in a Year with Father Mike Schmitz. It's like number 1 or 2 on like Apple Podcasts right now. He started it this year, but every day he does parts of the Bible, and he does the entire Bible in a year. Like you get the whole story of the Bible in a year by listening to this podcast. And Father Mike Schmitz he's like a young, dynamic, energetic priest. The guy's awesome. So you would totally enjoy that podcast. How the Bible and all the other religions are any different from fairy tales. One thing I will say is like people might listen to me talk about the Bible and say, "Well, Mr. Haynes, you think that the Bible is, historical to a large degree, but how come you don't say that about the Quran, right? Or about, the Nag Hammadi Codex, or about, the Epic of Gilgamesh? All these other religions have their scriptures. What are wrong with them?" And to that, I would say that the Catholic Church teaches that other religions have access to pieces of the truth, but they don't have access to the full truth. So what you'll find in other religions are parts of truth, right? And whatever, to the extent that other religions have, true or good aspects to them, the Catholic Church would affirm and agree with those things. And any parts of their scriptures that are actual bona fide history, the Catholic Church would say, "That's great history. We love it. It's awesome." But the parts that are invented or made up, the Catholic Church would say, "Well, you know what? That is that that belongs to the part of the religion that we can't affirm, right?" So, to the extent that the Bible, it represents actual history, which it mostly does, aside from, like I say, allegory and poetry, that stuff's all cool, just like it is in other religions. Oh yeah, prophecy is fulfilled in the New Testament. Yes, that's a good point too, right? Events in the Old Testament often have a fulfillment in the New Testament. Yeah, not much more to say about that. Oh, I want to say one more thing about the Bible too. So, how do historians know that things happened? Well, historians know that things happened because we have writings about them, right? Like, for example, Caesar had to cross the Rubicon at one point to retake Rome. And this happened around the year 400, I think. How do we know that Caesar crossed the Rubicon to retake Rome? Well, we know that because his secretary wrote it down. But actually, it wasn't his secretary. It was like the successor of his secretary, like 200 years later, right? So 200 years after Caesar crossed the Rubicon, somebody wrote it down. But that's considered legit history, even though that's the only accounting that we have of it. You think of like Homer's The Odyssey and the Iliad. The earliest copies we have of the Odyssey and the Iliad are like 1,500 years after the fact, right? So they seem pretty mythological, but some of it they suspect actually relates to true voyages. So we have these historical voyages that aren't even written about until 1500 years later. But this is history, right? This is like, history is comprised of like uh, people writing stuff down far after the events, far removed from the events, but it's considered legit history, right? Now, if you look at the Bible, there is very good evidence and arguments that show that the gospel writers and much of the New Testament was written within the first century, right? And we have some of the, like First Thessalonians, we think was written at around the year 40 A.D. or 45 A.D., which is like 10 years after the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, right? So within living memory, we have parts of the New Testament being written by people who saw it themselves, living among people who could corroborate it or could write refutations against them if it was a false story, right? So we have a lot of early writings of the Bible and the New Testament in particular. We have about 5,000 copies of the Bible from the first few hundred years, which is really unheard of in historical research. It's often said that the Bible is like the gold standard for an historical document because you have so many copies and they all agree to such a huge extent. So, it's not only, a good religious text, but it's a good historical text. And, very, very, very few people today would look at the Bible and say that, it is, it's a fairy tale or it's invented. There are no serious scholars who actually would say that. It's widely considered to just be accurate history. What else we got here? Okay, here we go. Back to bad soap chain. Like, I don't think this force would be able to would be able to be interested in the universe. It's just part of it, and I would define it as God. I just don't think that would present what it is very well. I just rather call it a force. The traditional term saying the universe is a force that controls things. So what you're describing is something called pantheism, right? Where the universe is God itself, and it's like a self-aware thing. What you have to do with that is reconcile it with the existence of religions, in particular Christianity, that contradict it. So, what do I mean by that? So you've got, for example, world's biggest religion, Christianity. How did it come about? Right? How did Christianity even start? So it started in the first century, right? You ask Christians, how did this all get started? They all will point back to the first century, to this Jesus fellow with his followers, and you have to look at what these claims are, right? They make some truth claims. You claim that this guy claims to be somehow the son of God, right? This fellow did all these miracles. This fellow predicted his own death and resurrection, and after his death and events to follow, his closest followers said, actually, he did resurrect. We saw him ourselves, and they all were executed as as traitorous liars for it. So you have to ask yourself: is it possible that these 12 guys, well, minus Judas, and then John, who died in exile but was tortured beforehand, would you ask yourself, would these guys actually die for something that they knew was a lie, right? So you have to weigh that possibility against the random philosophical supposition that maybe the universe is just a force, right? Because if the universe is a force, there's no way that the story of Jesus could ever be true, right? But we have super solid evidence that it is true. So that contradicts the idea that the universe is just God as a force, right? Yeah. So you've got to you can't just sort of assert that the universe is a force, that God is a life force of the universe, and then completely ignore the truth claims of other faith traditions or philosophical explanations. The Big Bang is fake. Wow. You can't just assert that. You gotta prove it, because all science right now says that the Big Bang was a real thing. Can you scroll down on the main mod? Okay, Borger Dad, what do you think happens when you die? Yeah, that's a great question. Super great question. What happens when you die? So I would repeat what the Catholic Church teaches, which is that after you die, your soul is separated from your body, and you encounter God immediately afterward, and you are judged based on the deeds of your life. And if you, you know, in fact, the Book of Revelation describes it as entering the wedding banquet, and you have to have a white wedding robe, which the the writer of Revelation then explains that the white robes are your righteous deeds, right? So you have to have righteous deeds. So what are the righteous deeds that you need to have? Well, you need to, believe and accept that Jesus was who he said he was, and that you have to then follow what his commandments were that he laid out, right? Believe in him, receive the sacraments that he set up, right? Baptism, confession, confirmation, all that good stuff, and then you have to remain in that relationship with him. So if you're configured that way when you die, then your soul is admitted into the what we call the beatific vision of God, where you're beholding God, most amazing thing ever, utter mind blow, and you're there until the end of time, right? Existing with God in this other realm, this other dimension, maybe. But at the end of time, Jesus is going to return, and the second time he comes back is not going to be quite as fun for everybody as the first time, right? Because we know that, according to sacred scripture and sacred tradition, that he's going to fix all of the corruption that is in creation. Everything that causes pain and suffering, all the stuff we hate, right? Sin and evil, it's all going away, and everything will be perfected. And then our soul is reunited with our perfected body to live out an actual temporal, corporeal existence with God here in the universe, the perfected universe. So that's what I believe happens when you die. Do you watch Dr. Taylor Marshall? I have heard the name, but I haven't. I'm drawing a blank on him right now. Oh yeah. We're not called Mormon. We're called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's funny that you mentioned that. I was going to say that, right? Because the LDS Church in the last, I think, 2 years came out and said, we really don't like being called the Mormon Church. We really prefer to be called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the president, whom they believe is a living apostle, I disagree with that. Their president basically bound them all to that, right? So now members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have to refer to it as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They can't really refer to it as as Mormonism or Mormons or whatever. Honestly, I'm not a Mormon. I'm not a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, so that doesn't bind me. And I'm going to continue to refer to them as Mormons because it's just easier to say. The man. Oh, Catholic Answers is a Twitch channel. I did not know that. That is cool. Jesus has been quiet ever since Bobby's dad came on stream. Am I getting close to the bottom of this? No. Turn off alerts. Father Mike Schmitz. Yes, he is awesome. Centenide, I like the cut of your jib. The fact that you can remember all this is amazing. Yeah, I got this mind like a steel trap. Am I caught up on questions? I think I'm caught up on questions here. Dude, imagine Jesus and his friends were like, yo, let's prank everyone and tell them I'm the son of God. That would be the biggest prank in history. Bad soap chain, you've got all the awesome questions here. Yeah, so that is possible. It is technically possible that Jesus and the apostles would be like, yeah, dude, let's just prank everybody with this awesome story about me resurrecting. But then you have to ask yourself, why would they do that? Like, what do they stand to gain from that? Because if they were planning on personal riches and amazing stuff, it didn't really work, right? Let's imagine for a second you're one of those people and you're like, yeah, dude, let's prank everybody. And then, the plan unfolds, right? The leader is killed, horribly killed, like killed in the worst way you could ever be killed, right? This is not the worst way, but one of the worst ways that you could be killed. So he loses out, right? So whatever he was planning didn't happen, whatever he was looking to get. And then the rest of them are all executed, also in horrible ways, right? You get like St. Andrew, right? Crucified on an X-shaped cross. St. Peter crucified upside down. We had apostles boiled in oil, shot through with spears, skinned alive, right? And they're all being executed, at different times and in different places, but not a single one of them is recorded as ever saying, you know what, just jokes, guys, jokes, really put down the crucifix. We were kidding, right? They lost everything for this. They lost everything. The famous question is usually, would you die for a lie? Would you die for a lie? Because that's what they were doing, right? They were dying for a lie if what you're asking is true. Far more likely that they were dying for something that they knew was true and they'd seen for themselves. Not many people can withstand torture all the way to death for something that they know is false, right? All you have to say is, yeah, we were kidding, and then they take you off the rack, right? But they all were executed, right? So super unlikely that they were faking it. And then there's a ton of miracles too that happened all through the centuries that also sort of point back to the fact that actually that these guys were all telling the truth. Oh yeah, the other thing I don't explain, how would God judge you? That would require him to have an opinion and personality. It doesn't really require him to have an opinion or a personality. It just requires him to have a standard that he's going to measure your life against, and then the ability to do so, right? So an all-powerful, super calculating, super intellect could certainly do both of those things. I wonder how good you did in history class. Me? I did okay in history actually, but I didn't continue past grade 10. Get your dad to take the IQ test. We did. I did the IQ test when I was in grade 9. My IQ is 133. Borger dad, what do you think could happen in the future? Future things will happen in the future. I have no idea. Oh, I think the most likely thing is that Jesus either was just made up or was just crazy. I'm almost caught up to questions. So, yes, the theory that Jesus was made up is actually not held by any scholar today. There are like possibly one or two scholars from major universities that make the claim that Jesus is a full-on myth, but there really is no serious scholar accepts that supposition, and the reason why they don't is because we have, as I was mentioning earlier, very good evidence that the New Testament was written within the 1st century, and that is way too soon for a myth to arise. Right? The way myths arise is that there's a lot of word of mouth telling of stories about, remember that strong guy who lived in the forest? Yeah, man, that guy was so strong. What was his name again? Steve the strong guy. Yeah, in the forest. And then, you tell your kids about Steve the strong man in the forest, and then the kids tell the grandkids about Stephen, the mighty man of the mountain. And it just kind of slowly changes over time until somebody writes it down. But it's taken so long before it to get written down that it's like hundreds of years after the time that this dude lived in the forest. But that's not how it happened with Jesus, right? We had in the first couple of decades after his death, the writings, the much of the New Testament, and the people who saw those events were still alive, right? So they could check these letters out and go, that's right, that's wrong, that's right, that's wrong. And more importantly, the enemies of Christianity were still alive. So they were around to say, Jesus never did that. Jesus never said that. Jesus didn't raise Lazarus from the dead. Jesus didn't change water into wine. Jesus did no. But we have nothing. We have no evidence that the enemies were ever saying that. And they would have been happy to, right? The Jews would have been all over that stuff. Jews would have been like, you're making up myths. This guy didn't do any of that stuff. But we have no documents from the enemies of Christianity saying that. And the reason why we don't is because either they just didn't write it down, or they knew it would have been easy to refute them. if they had written it down. So the enemies of Christianity were basically silent at the time that the New Testament was written, even though they had all seen the stuff that was getting written down, which means that they basically were saying, yeah, okay, you got us on that. What you wrote down here actually did happen, and we can't really claim otherwise because we'd look stupid because everyone else has saw it too. Bad soap chain. Oh, I'm not comparing you to scholars. 17-year-old dude has all knowledge from YouTube. I'll give you points for admitting that. But I'll say when I was 18, actually 19, I started going to university. And I went to Waterloo. I studied computer science in the math faculty. And that was my first experience with hardcore atheists. And I was like, these guys make some good points. Maybe God is just a force outside the universe and doesn't really care about us. What does Christianity have to say about that? And then I read some books. In fact, one book I read was this one. This very book right here, When Skeptics Ask. It was a book by Norm Geisler and Ron Brooks. And basically, it's a book about how do you answer people who are skeptical of Christianity? And I found these incredible arguments in this book that basically gave like nice solid answers to all these questions that you're probably coming across on YouTube now. And that's the one thing about YouTube. Like YouTube gives and YouTube takes away, right? Because anybody can make a YouTube video. Like any joker can make a YouTube video and claim that they've got the answer to everything. I would encourage people to really YouTube is fine, but if you really want to get like a solid explanation for things, you generally have to go to the books or to like professional channels, right, where people get paid to do this work, because people that make books get paid to make books, and people that get paid to make YouTube channels or podcasts, they have to do a good job. They have to get their facts straight, because if they don't get paid, and then they don't eat any food. So they try really hard to do a good correct job with that stuff. What do you think of fake fan fiction gospels like the Gospel of Thomas? I think they're funny. There's like 50 competing gospels, right? There's 4 that are accepted as like actual gospels, but another 46 that are bogus, right? Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Peter, the Gospel of Lazarus. There's a ton of gospels, and the reason why was because Jesus was incredible, right? I mean, his fame spread, and if you could write a story about Jesus and pass it off as true fact, you could maybe get people to follow you and maybe buy you food, right? So there was a big incentive for people to kind of hitch their wagon to the story of Jesus. And the fact that only 4 gospels are recognized as like actual history when there's like so many that got written, I think speaks a lot to the fact that the Catholic Church takes this stuff seriously and tries very, very hard to make sure that, they're weeding out the garbage that could have gotten into the Bible. Yeah. Is Borger a good boy? He's the best boy. Come on. Oh, you screenshot all the books. That's awesome. Jesus loves you. Join my Discord. That's a Nightbot. Do you believe that all the stories in every religion are true, or do you just believe the stories in the Bible? Well, like I was saying earlier, to the extent that other religions record actual history, I think they're true. But you actually, the only real, let's think about the actual scriptures that are out there. You've got the Bible, you've got the Quran, you've got the Book of Mormon, you've got the I think it's pronounced the Bhagavad Gita for the Hindu faith. There really aren't that many. The Book of Mormon, unfortunately, it's pretty obviously fiction. The Quran is mostly history, and in fact, like Muhammad himself didn't ever do any miracles, right? So there really aren't that many miracles at all in the Book of Mormon, or not the Book of Mormon, the Quran. The one miracle that I'm aware of that sometimes Muslims will point to is this supposed miracle where Muhammad splits the moon in half, and then the moon comes back into full again. That's basically it. So do I believe the Quran? Oh, I believe that it records history, but it doesn't really have a lot of supernatural weight in my mind. Yeah. Will you ever come back to answer your question? Oh, what do I? Yeah, we got evolution again. Okay. Yes, theistic evolution. Look it up on Wikipedia. It's what I subscribe to. Will you ever come back again to answer questions? Yeah, I could probably be persuaded to come back and answer questions. What is the power of the sacraments? Why do we need them? Again, I already know this, but just for the viewers. Well, uh, if you happen to live in a time of Jesus and hang out with Jesus, that's fantastic because you have the source of God's life there with you, and you can sort of partake of that as much as you want. But what about us poor saps who didn't live in the time of Jesus? What do we get? Do we get anything? Well, we do, right? And Jesus knew we would be here. Jesus knew we were coming along, so he established ways for us to tap into that life of God, decades, centuries, millennia after he's walking the face of the earth. And the way he did that was by creating these sacraments and giving his apostles the power to propagate them. So every sacrament is a way for us to encounter the life of God through the power of Jesus. And they're super cool. And I didn't believe in them until I was like 26, but I'm 48 now, and I've been enjoying them nicely for like 28 years now. I just don't understand how God's opinions or standards would align with some people's opinions or standards and not others. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. Bad soap chain. Feel free to maybe re-explain or re-ask that question in a different way. I had some Mormons try to convert me, but it didn't work. But I did feel bad for them. They tried to get me by using pretty girls, but my faith and reason was too strong. Good for you, Shrekbeard. I have to say, super rare to have Mormon sisters come to your door. I'll try to be, charitable here and use their preferred name right now. It's super rare to have Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints sisters come to your door. It's pretty common to have Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints elders come to your door. And like I said, they're super nice. But, if you spend a little bit of time researching it, it's not that hard to find problems with what they're talking about. Like the Book of Abraham is just nuts, right? If you do some reading into the backstory of the Book of Abraham, where it came from, it is really pretty out there. But super nice people. Yeah. Question. In the Bible, it says the devil was cast into earth. Do you believe he's still walking here in earth today, or is he just a dimensional being in the spiritual realm that we can't see? So angels are pure spirit, and they don't have a physical body unless they choose to have us perceive them as having one, or perhaps briefly incarnating one. But in their typical form, they don't have a physical body. They're just pure spirit. So when Lucifer was cast from heaven, so he is among us in a spiritual way, and still retains the super intellect of an angel, but with his powers greatly diminished. Can you do a stream of you gaming? I don't game, I'm sorry. I'm trying to play Fortnite, and my daughter's teaching it to me, and I stink. Although I was like super good at Unreal Tournament back in the day, so I should be able to play Fortnite. I don't know why it's hard. The elders are the ones who come to your door. They send the sisters to speak to you after you agree to talk. It was a pretty interesting experience. Really, eh? I had sisters come to our door once, and actually I was super bummed out because I was raking leaves, and they came to the door while I was raking, and I was kind of distracted, and I was like, I'm sorry, really, we don't need to have this discussion. But then I kind of realized I was like basically passing up, like collecting a cool Pokemon by passing off talking to the Mormon sisters, the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints sisters, because they're just so rare. You never see them door to door. But the elders, they come around all the time. We have a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints steakhouse, they call it, steak like a tent steak, not like a meat steak, up the street from us. So they're always coming around. Are you a programmer? I am a programmer. I've been programming for fun and profit since I was 10 years old. Like how you're at the gates of heaven, like you said, God judges your life and whatever his standards are. Why would they be the same opinions as some humans, but then other humans have different opinions? Well, I mean, God made it pretty clear what the standards for behavior are that he set down for us. right? We've got the 10 Commandments. We've got the 2 great commandments of Jesus. And that's just like facts, right? It doesn't like opinions. So some people's opinions might align with those facts, but they might not. There's nothing that would force them to. So, when the deeds of your life are being judged at the end of your life, it's the lining against those facts, right? Yeah, it's not really about opinions, I don't think. Yes, I am a massive genius when it comes to computers. Yeah, I have been professionally developing software since 1993. Yeah, doing it for a long time. A lot of websites, a lot of enterprise software. Yep, and I've been doing it as my own business since 2006. So self-employed, working on contract for large and small clients, and solving problems all day long. That's all I do. Like, would that mean there are religiously right opinions and wrong opinions? Sure, opinions can be right and wrong. Yeah. Um, in fact, I mean, I would say that any atheist who is like sincerely seeking the truth uh, is holding on to some wrong opinions. But hopefully, given enough time, they will free themselves of those wrong opinions as they encounter true opinions, true arguments. A good example of that is a fellow named Anthony Flew. Anthony Flew was a notorious atheist from the 1970s, and he wrote a book called "There Is No God." Um, he got on all kinds of talk shows. He was on TV all the time. This Anthony Flew guy, very famous book. And then, like 20 years later, he wrote another book called "There Is a God," because he actually came to realize that his arguments were wrong, and that the pro-God side had more had more solid arguments. And he even admitted in his second book that he never really seriously considered the arguments, the pro-God side of the debate. So, yeah, you can have wrong and right opinions and arguments about God, but you have to keep searching, right? And even I'm always searching. I mean, I still review arguments for and against God, and because I was wrong once, right? I mean, I was a Baptist for like 26 years, and now I'm a Catholic. So I got lovingly hoodwinked once. Perhaps I'm being hoodwinked again, right? So even me, like I'm not stopping. I'm still researching, still reading more stuff. But what I find is that I'm much more often just coming across the same old thing time and time again. I have really not seen the last new thing that I saw about the religion debate was probably about 10 years ago, when I encountered the Board, Vilenkin, and Guth theorem about the past being finite, which you kind of need to have, right? If you have an infinite past, how do you get to today? But they proved it, right? They proved that if your universe is on average expanding, then the past has to be finite. Super tidy little proof, and that was a cool thing that I saw about 10 years ago. But it's rare now, right? I just keep coming across the same old stuff, and it's I find the pro God side way more convincing. Well, all right. Can you explain to me the standards to get to heaven? Hey, thanks for talking to us today, Dad. Yes, Jesus love you. You are welcome. You can figure out moral righteousness using natural reason like Aristotle did. Very true. So even people who don't know about Jesus can be good. Absolutely true. Okay, and then that question about can you explain to me the standards to get to heaven? Um, it's funny. If you talk to some Protestants, they will give you like a very simple, tidy, compact answer of like, how do I get to heaven? Well, you believe in Jesus and you go to heaven, right? It's like super easy. Catholics often haven't really had that kind of an easy answer because there's just more to the faith than that, honestly. Stuff is complicated sometimes, and there's just more to things. Although I'm proud to say that a couple years ago I developed a very tidy little Catholic version of how do you get to heaven, and it basically is 4 words: believe, receive, never leave. What does that mean? It means believe what Jesus said about himself, receive the sacraments that he set up, baptism, first communion, confession, right? So believe, receive, and then never leave. So don't commit a mortal sin, right? Stay in that relationship, stay in the community that Jesus established, right? Jesus said, I will build my church, not my churches, right? A singular church. So you stay in that church, and then you're golden. It's believe, receive, never leave. Why doesn't God come down? Why doesn't God come down from heaven every couple of years to show us that He's still here? To show us He still is here. I come across this actually a lot on podcasts. People will be like, "Why doesn't God just show Himself like the big head in the sky? Right here I am, I'm God." And the problem with that is that even if God showed up as a big head in the sky, saying, "Oh, here I am, I'm God," I mean, there would be atheists that would still look at that and say, no, this is a trick. I'm being tricked somehow. Somebody is sending a laser beam into my brain and tricking me into thinking that there's a God there. Or maybe there's like a drone swarm up there that is just kind of like making the face in the sky that I think is God. Like the best way to answer the question of like, why doesn't God come down and show Himself every now and then is to reply with the question of, what evidence would you need to believe in God? Like, what would God have to do to convince you 100% that He's there? And really think about that. Like, what would it take to convince you? Like, what would God have to do physically in the world to prove that He's there? And if you can't think of something, then what it means is like you're basically, you're not really looking for evidence for God. You're just looking for ways to avoid believing in Him, right? So, if you can think of like, well, if God definitively did this, then I would believe. Then I think you're probably more on the track of like being open to the possibility that God could be there. Project Bluebeam. I don't know what Project Bluebeam is. You mean Project Blue Book, like UFOs? Yes, Centenide. The free will thing, right? If God overwhelms us with proof that He's there, then yeah, we lose our free will and we become a robot, right? I mean, if God forces us to love Him, that's not good, right? If God forces us to believe in Him and to love Him, like we have a word for forced love, and it's not a good word, right? I mean, it's basically rape. So, and God is a gentleman, He will propose His existence to us, but He's never going to impose it on us. What do we got here? I don't understand how anyone cannot meet the standards of God, because everyone was born a certain way. So if anyone were not to meet this criteria of God, God would have made them that way. So you're getting into like what we think of as determinism here. Does God determine everything that you do in your life? Some people say that yes, in fact, God does determine everything that you do in your life. And if that were true, then for sure, when you die, God could never exclude you from heaven because you were just doing what you had to do, right? You had no choice in the matter. You couldn't have done anything else. But we know from experience that determinism doesn't seem to be true. Like we seem to have a free will that can get pretty crazy, right? Like you can imagine, for example, like Felix the cat, just randomly. Like, why would God determine you to do that, right? Or you could think randomly, like Felix the cat dancing a waltz with the Marianas Trench. Like, your will can do all kinds of crazy things, right? So it doesn't seem like free will is fake. And given that it doesn't seem that it's fake, we have to assume it's not and proceed using it to the best of our ability to spend our eternal life with God. So He's punishing them for being how He made them. So the Catholic Church has this idea of what is called invincible ignorance. So let's say you're born in like an African rainforest and you're a pygmy and you've never heard of Jesus, you've never heard of God, and you just live and you die. So now you go to see God and God's like, well, did you follow the 10 Commandments, right? Well, the pygmy's like, what are those? So the Catholic Church teaches that, in fact, God will judge you based on how well you responded to His direction in your life as you understood it, right? So a pygmy has a conscience, right? Has a sense of right and wrong. And if they try to live a good life as they understand it, then we have a hope that there will be salvation for them. Just like us who have the benefit of access to sacred scripture, sacred tradition, a church community, we are also have to live a life that is as good as we know it to be, so that when we get to heaven, we're in the same situation where, we did the best we could with what we had, and we had a lot. And other people that don't have as much, that they still do the best they could with what they have, and they're in the same situation as we are, right? So it's not like God screws over people by having them born into weird times and cultures where they just can never learn about him. He holds them to whatever level of responsibility was possible for them to be held to. Yeah, I'll look up Project Bluebeam. I never heard of that one. Genetics versus free will. You can overcome any genetic weaknesses by increasing your willpower. Yeah, okay, I'll go with that. Well, I don't think he directly determines what you do, but I think your brain works a certain way, and the only things that determine what you choose are events that happen in your life and the way your brain is programmed when you were born. God controls both of those, obviously not directly. So when we say that God controls your brain, which is true to a certain extent, what we mean is that God maintains your brain in existence, but he does not force you to use it in certain ways. And that's, again, it goes back to free will. Like, we all experience and can perceive that we have free will. Let's look at it this way. If you have free will, legitimately, then you need to use it as best you can to achieve, the state of salvation. If you only think you have free will, but you actually don't, you just don't realize it, well, guess what? You still have to live like you do because it seems like you do. Do you know what I'm saying? You can't just kick up your feet and say, well, it seems like I have free will, but I probably really don't, so I'm just going to do whatever I want. And then God has to take me to heaven anyway. You really can't do that, right? You have to live with things as they are appearing to you, unless you have some compelling proof that there really are, that reality really is a different way, and that really free will is an illusion. I'm done with questions. Okay, so it's 10-1. I'm going to wrap it up there, but that's been super fun, and I'm happy to come on another time if you want to queue up any more questions. But check out those books I suggested. In particular, the New Proofs of the Existence of God. Super awesome book. I would totally recommend that. They have a website too where they have most of this stuff. Father Robert Spitzer. Yeah. Do I believe in reincarnation? No, I do not. Thank you for the answers. You're very welcome. Okay, Bad Soap Chain. Write out some of those questions and email them or message them or whatever, however you get them over here, and I'll try to tackle them again for you too. Thank you, everybody. Happy streaming, and we'll catch you on the flippity flip.
Thank you. I'll wrap up. Do you want your sweater? Guess not. Well, yeah. Tell them about WQ so they can debate marriage. I might. Yeah, I might. I'll see. But I hope, yeah, 'cause guys,